We are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. Though others may free our bodies, none but ourselves can free our minds. That was the words of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, 1937. Those words were put to song in 1980 by the legendary Bob Marley. Okay, so I want to start a conversation today that might be a bit controversial for most people, but I believe that this is still a conversation that we need to have. And the conversation that we're talking about, that I'm talking about today, is that is Black History Month a form of mental slavery? And should us in the Caribbean, in particular the British West Indies, should we be celebrating Black History Month? Because the reality is that the Caribbean history is Black history, and why should we limit our history to just 1 month? So that is a conversation that I think is very important and that we need to have. So let's talk about it. Okay, so let's have the conversation. So when I was growing up in Jamaica in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 90s, I used to hang around a lot of Rastafarian. You know, when I was a child, there's a lot of Rastafarian around, and those were the days when we didn't have like cable TV, we didn't have internet, we didn't have phones. We had one TV station. So entertainment was pretty much going outside and sitting down with elders and listening to stories of the past. So sitting down with a lot of Rastafarians, which back in those days, people did not give Rastafarians any type of credit. Like Rastafarians were looked on like crazy people, like they're mad people. But nonetheless, like you come from the ghetto, you sit down and you listen to Rastafarian reasoning. And that was one of the first times, you know, back in those days, Rastafarians, they used to use the word pagan a lot. So pagan holidays, like Christmas being a pagan holiday, Easter being a pagan, you know, the whole, you know, pagan holiday type of thing. And, you know, what they look at as the Roman Empire and all the things that they instituted and that we're following today. So in those reasoning, a lot of those Rastafarians, they were of the mindset that Black History Month was considered a pagan holiday, that Black History Month was pretty much instituted to limit our history to being slaves. Yes, so back in those days, like in Jamaica, Black History Month pretty much feel like how, you know, would feel like in Christmas. In Christmas, when you put up all the decorations and you watch the Christmas movies and you listen to the Christmas songs and stuff like that. February in Jamaica, for the month of February, like you have all these American slavery movies like Roots. You had like Color Purple and all of those movies that they would show on TV in Jamaica, because at the time we had like one TV station. So you're watching those slave movies, American movies, in February, and you're listening to like revolutionary music, and they're telling you about, we're talking about like Marcus Garvey, and we're talking about some of the you know, like Dr. King. We're talking about Rosa Parks, and we're talking about all the famous Black figures over the years, like in American history. That's what we're talking about in Jamaica back in those days. And according to those Rastafarians at the time, they're saying that, look, like Black people were brought in the Caribbean, in America, over 400 years ago as slaves. We were enslaved in the Caribbean, in the Americas, and there is no history without us. Like you cannot tell the history of the Caribbean, you cannot tell the history of America without Black people being a part of it. So back then they were saying that, look, why is it that we only talk about Black history in February, but yet in our schools at the time, we're talking about Christopher Columbus discovering Jamaica. We're talking about Christopher Columbus when he arrived in Trinidad and Tobago. That is a conversation. That is the education that we're having in school. We're talking about all these people throughout the year, but then February, we treat February as Black History Month, and that is it. Like our entire history is just limited to 1 month. So that is where this whole thing came from, where a lot of those Rastafarians back then saw Black History Month as like a pagan holiday, just a month that the Americans instituted to keep black people happy in America, and then people in the Caribbean just took it on, and a lot of Rastafarian thought that that was ridiculous, because the fact that places like Jamaica, places like Barbados, like majority black population, but in our books at the time, the history in our books is not black history, but 1 month is set aside for black history. So that is the premise of this conversation. So guys, sound off in the comment section and let me know, what do you think so far? Do you think that like us in the Caribbean celebrating black history is crazy? Do you think that? Because the reality is that, why don't we have Chinese history in the Caribbean? Why don't we have Indian history in the Caribbean? Because as we know that the Chinese came to the Caribbean as indentured laborers over 200 years ago. Same with the Indians. Indian came to the Caribbean over 200 years ago as indentured laborers also. And indentured labor is just like a fancy word for slave, because they worked in similar conditions with money that could not purchase anything. So I believe that when we're talking about in the Caribbean, in the West Indies, if we're going to talk about history, we should just talk about history. We should learn about everything for the past 400 years. We should be talking about the full history of the Caribbean, the contributions. We talk about Africans brought to the Caribbean being enslaved. We talk about the abolition of slavery. We talk about Indians coming to the Caribbean as indentured laborers. We talk about Chinese coming to the Caribbean as indentured laborers also. And that should be just Caribbean history. So sound off in the comment section and let me know, what are your thoughts so far? Yes, so another thing about black history now, and this is what I learned on my own since I got older, is that I can recall back in the days, as I say, watching Roots, watching Color Purple and those shows back in the days, those movies back in the days. And I think it pretty much conditioned your mind to think that our history started with slavery. And trust me, like it might sound crazy, but even it took until I became an adult and I start digging deep into black history itself. Like I started saying to myself, like, no, we're more than this. And I dig further, and you realize that hundreds of years ago, like, we had kings and we had queens in Africa. So our existence did not start with slavery. And I believe that our mindset in North America today is that we just have a mindset of, like, when we achieve something, like, we're the first to achieve it because our history started with slavery. And I can't forget the night when Barack Obama won. And I sat up the entire night and I was watching the election. And when Barack Obama won, like, honestly, like, I got so emotional because I'm like, my gosh, like, I never thought I would live to see the day, like, a black person become a president, But then when reflecting, I'm like, but no, like, our history did not start with slavery. Like, we're not slaves. We were enslaved, but we're not slaves. And when I started digging deeper in black history and started learning about people like, Mansa Musa, like, that was like from the 1300s, one of the richest man in the world at the time. And that was a black man. When I started digging deeper into the history of Ethiopia and how, Ethiopia had kings and queens going back thousands of years. And like, they had, like, even some of their prized possession today, they are in the United Kingdom in a vault locked away. Like, the crowns of kings and queens of Ethiopia locked away in a British vault. And when I, dig deeper and look into the history of places like Ghana, places like Kenya, all with different names now, but still a part of a rich Africa, like, then I'm realizing that, what? Africans, the story that we have been taught about slavery, that, the British went to Africa, to like a primitive land where nobody was doing anything, where we were living like animals, and they brought us to North America and enslave us, that was not the true story because, like, as people might know, like civilization started in Africa. A lot of good things were happening in Africa before we were brought to North America. Our ancestors were brought to North America. So that is another thing that with Black History Month, it just focus on us being slaves, us, our ancestors being enslaved, and that is where Black history start. Black history, when we focus on Black history, it seemed like we were just slaves, like we weren't great before that. And that is one of the problems that I have with the way our Black history is depicted. And then in recent times, we see a lot of Americans now are pushing against this Black history thing and saying that why is Black history in America just 1 month? Why is it not a part of our history in our history books and stuff like that? And Morgan Freeman was one of the first person to come out and said that. And here's a clip of Morgan Freeman saying that, like, quite a while ago, years ago actually, Morgan Freeman came out and said that. And at the time, like, he got a lot of flack for it, but there are more people saying what he said back in the days. There are more people saying that in 2025. Let's take a look.
Black History Month you find
ridiculous.
Why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Oh, come on.
What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? No, well, come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh, why not?
Yeah.
Do you want one?
No.
I don't either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
How are we going to get rid of racism?
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace. You know me as Morgan Freeman. You want to say what
Okay, so that was Morgan Freeman. So guys, sound off in the comment section and let me know. Do you think it's ridiculous that in the Caribbean, especially, as I said, in the English-speaking Caribbean, in places in Africa, do you think it's ridiculous for predominant Black countries or countries that you can't tell the history of those countries without talking about African contribution to those countries? Do you think it's ridiculous to just limit our history to 1 month, Black history? Sound off in the comment section and let me know. Do you think it's time now that the Caribbean, that we talk about history, we talk about Black history, like incorporated in overall Caribbean history, which include, as I said earlier on, Chinese coming to the Caribbean as indentured laborers, Indians coming to the Caribbean as indentured laborers. Like, my personal belief is that all of these cultures coming together, talking about the history of like a Trinidad, Tobago, like a Barbados, a Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I believe that we need to rewrite history and we need to get out of this thing talking about Christopher Columbus discover this or Christopher Columbus discovered that. And that history was written for us. I think it's time that we now should correct history and say, no, like, this is Caribbean history. Sound off in the comment section and let me know what are your thoughts. And one other thing also with Caribbean history, with Black history or history in the Caribbean, is that the history is not spreading across the Caribbean. For example, like, if you are Jamaican, you just know about Marcus Garvey. You don't know about like someone like Maurice Bishop. Maurice Bishop, like a great leader in Grenada at the time, that's a national hero there. If you're in Jamaica now, you probably don't know about Maurice Bishop. You probably don't know about Sir Garfield Sobers, unless you're like a long-time cricket follower, national hero of Barbados. You probably don't know that. You probably don't know about Joseph Chataway, who was the first national hero of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I believe that it is time that Caribbean, like as a part of the Caribbean, that we take control of our education, including our history, and that these history, there's no reason why all the different islands in the Caribbean should not share history. There's no reason why a Jamaican should not know about historical figures in Trinidad and Tobago, why someone in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in school should not be learning about historical figure in Grenada. We're one Caribbean, one West Indies, CARICOM, and I believe that this is what needs to happen with our education system, including our history. And as I said, our Black history cannot be limited to 1 month. So sound off in the comment section. Let me know what are your thoughts. And guys, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content. And remember, peace. I'm out.